Hi, everyone. Jim Crawford here. We're here with another podcast episode, and I have a person who is going to be leading our new Fairfax, Virginia office. Not quite open yet, but we're open for business, but not quite open yet. Andy Padzik is sitting next to me. And Andy has been practicing law for a good while. We're extremely excited to have him sitting here. He's been actually on the job, so to speak, for several months as we put this together with the Fairfax office. We're basically getting there. But why don't we do this? Let's start with an introduction of you. If you can tell everybody just a little bit about you, where you're from, what you're about, and who you are.
Where I'm from is a tricky question. My dad was Air Force, so I was a military brat, but spent the majority of my time in Virginia. Harrisonburg is where I grew up. Ended up in Hampton Roads, where I practiced family law. I started my own firm over a decade ago in Hampton Roads because I wanted to do things a little bit different, kind of like you do.
Sure.
And really found myself attracted to family law. I think it's one of the most important things we can do is to give back and to help families, and especially when there's young children involved. So I really focused on that, but after COVID, kind of decided to go a different route, joined a nationwide family law firm and did that for a little while. But then I found what you were doing here, and it kind of mirrored the way I wanted to build my practice, but on a bigger scale. So here I am.
Well, it sounds like you have some really concrete years in family/domestic law.
I do, and I was a guardian ad litem for a long time, and that's really what kind of developed my personality on, especially when there's children involved, is I think I can do everything possible to represent my client, but still maintain the relationship so the kids don't have to suffer. And that's kind of what guides me.
So, Andy, what would you say from your expertise of doing this? What are some of the biggest issues that, let's take divorce, so to speak. What are some of the biggest issues that your clients in Virginia face? What are you looking at? Some common big issues? Some
of the common interests are when they have a house in common. You know, that's one of the assets that most people seem to have, regardless of what their income base is. I'm going from that. The really big issue that I have is custody and visitation. You know, people want to fight for as much time with their children as possible. And unfortunately, we have some people who aren't as good at parents as others. They still won't give up the fight, but for the child's best interest, which is the deciding factor in Virginia, as in many other states, they really shouldn't be involved.
Well, I've had a chance to see in action some of your thought process, and from what I've seen you doing so far is that a lot of times it appears that you try to take a volatile situation and really kind of put some perspective on it initially. Try to calm the parties down, try to work it out if it's possible. But I've also seen you in a situation where if it can't be worked out, you go do what you need to do.
I will come like a lion if I need to be, but I don't always think that's the best way to go. You know, the old adage, you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar, and that's kind of the approach I take is let's see if we can work this out so that, especially if they're in a smaller town. So what I tell them is I want you to be able to be in a store and not throw cans of food at each other. That to me is a win. If we can take a volatile situation and put it so that they can at least coexist.
Well, so what would you say if the people watching this that, typically the ones we have watching our podcast are, they're contemplating a divorce, or maybe they're in the middle of a divorce and they're not happy with the lawyer that they have, and just things aren't just going the way it is. What would you recommend to people in both of those situations? Let's start with the issue of a divorce is probably going to happen. What would you recommend to them?
Well, I think the first thing I advise my clients to do is, one, to make sure. I've had clients where I talked them into going to counseling and working it out. They came back to me with their spouse a year later and said, here we are. And that's great, but some people can't do that. And I've had people tell me, I know some people have it worse than me. But I told them that's the wrong way to look at it. Some people have it better than you. And that should be how you gauge a marriage. Could it be better?
Sure.
And not just, are there certain things that I want better, but is this the life you imagine? And if not, what do you want to change? So that's the starting point of your contemplating divorce is, what are you looking for? Do you just want to be done with this whole thing and walk away and start a new life? Do you have issues you want to sort out? And make those concrete so that we have a plan going forward if you talk to an attorney. And that's the same thing I tell people who have an attorney and maybe it didn't quite click, they didn't get the representation they wanted, is let's be clear about what the goals are. Let me understand not just where you want to go, but where you came from, so that I can get the holistic approach. And let's go from there, and let's tackle those.
Well, it sounds like a pretty comprehensive ability. I know also that you do have a mediation program that you try to handle, and I assume that fits into what you're talking about. In other words,
Absolutely.
if it can be mediated, if it can be worked out, I assume it's less costly,
Mm-hmm.
a lot less drama, a lot less headache, and it is what it is.
And you're not waiting on a judge who hasn't met you, or your spouse before, your child, if that's involved, to make a decision after a couple hours of a hearing.
Right. I hear you. So what would you say to the client that is in a scenario where they just kind of feel like they're over their head, they're drowning in the divorce, and going back to what we talked about, maybe the lawyer's not communicating with them properly. Maybe they just getting the band end of the stick. I don't know. But what would you say? How psychologically, what can you do for a client to try to pull them out of the abyss to try to move them forward?
And I think that's an important part of what we're talking about is that when you have an attorney, in my view, that attorney's responsibility, in addition to managing the legal aspect, is to take the burden off of the shoulders of the client. That's what I try and do for my clients is let me worry about that. You focus on, your day-to-day or whatever it is, focus on your kids, but let me do the heavy lifting.
Okay.
Let me focus on the ugly parts of this and try and take that away from you.
Right.
Because there's so much in a divorce that can just drag you down. I've been through my own divorce, and you get caught up in every little detail. Leave that to an attorney, leave that to me.
Yeah.
And that's my belief is I can do that heavy lifting so they can just live their life for a while. And,
Well, that's a big deal because a divorce, from my experience as well, and I've been doing this for 33 years, is that it's devastating, isn't it, to clients? I mean, it can be devastating. Some people, we did as a side note, it's a little quirky, but we had this commercial we did for a divorce commercial, and it was this showing of this fellow in rain, and he was looking up at the sky like this and smiling, and we had words to the effect that why go through a divorce, and basically he said because it's worth it. Okay. So that's probably the case at times.
Yeah.
But even when you're going through a divorce and it's the right thing to do, and it's going to take its toll on the kids and other people, but you have to do it. So, and people may be drowning in that thought process. Do we have any services? Do we refer people to counseling? Do we have professionals that can try to help people move forward in these situations?
Mm-hmm. And what I try to do is I have kind of a network of therapists, counselors, things like that. And if my client needs that, I'll definitely recommend it because, like we talked about, it's such a heavy burden to carry.
Yeah.
And nobody goes into a marriage thinking it's going to end at any time,
Right.
Right. And so no matter what the circumstance, even if you've fought for it for 20 years or this is new and it just wasn't what you thought.
Well, I hear you. And, it's such an esoteric discussion because, we both know a ton of lawyers. I mean, I can't count how many lawyers across the country. And, you have criminal lawyers. We do criminal law too. And criminal morphs into these cases, by the way. But, every type of area of law. But domestic law is such a on the ground, in your face type of law because this is what's happening in society. This is what's happening. I tell you another part and some other things beside the big issues that you already mentioned, like houses and things like that in custody. The alimony issues, pension issues, military divorce type issues. A lot of little things that could make a difference. I've seen people who, Jim, I want that dog. The dog is more important than anything in their life, right?
Yeah.
But so would you say this, and from our discussions, divorce is one thing,
Mhm.
But even part of divorce, or even if you're not married and you get into a custody situation, custody seems to drive everybody's motivation, and it's such a volatile scenario because it could be a situation where one spouse illogically
Mhm.
is not thinking correctly about it, or it could be a situation where, like, damn, I'm right. This other spouse cannot take care of this child.
Yeah.
You know, so
Absolutely.
how do you handle those situations, especially with the child custody?
Right. Well, we're fortunate in Virginia that we often have a guardian ad litem appointed in custody and visitation that's in the juvenile court. If we go to circuit court where we're doing a divorce, we can ask for a guardian ad litem. But everything is driven by 10 factors, the best interest factors of the child. And so, as an attorney, knowing if I'm going in to custody or visitation with a child, one, I have an advocate for the child. So that child,
Sort of
you know, if I have just off the hook kind of crazy parent on the other side, I have some reassurance that if I have a
Somebody's gonna break the norms.
somebody's looking out for that child.
Yeah.
So it's not just me.
There's some adults in
Yeah.
it, right? Okay.
But I will make sure we document that, and especially if there's been abuse, any kind of physical violence in the house, that affects not just the spouse but the children. And I think we have to protect the families from that. So going forward, we just document it. We have evidence of that. If we need to, we'll get a protective order as part of what we're doing going forward to make them feel safe in that process.
I hear you. And alluding to what I said before, the criminal process creeps into these things with assaults and domestic violence, and we do a lot of domestic violence type cases.
Mhm.
And of course, could you talk a little bit about the ultimate issue in a case, which is litigation, which is the actual trial at times. We try to avoid it. We do what's best for our client, and we try to mediate. We try to work it out as far as some sort of property settlement agreement type scenario. But what do you do when you finally realize, hey, you got to go to trial?
Right.
What do you do?
Which is, I say an unfortunate circumstance, but not always. But that's sometimes where we have to go. Now, we can't work it out. There's issues. And rightfully so, there's custody visitation. But what we have to do at that point, getting ready for it, we do discovery, we do requests for production of documents, we might do a deposition, if there's caretakers involved, things like that going forward. So we know the situation, we know what witnesses will say when we get to trial. The last thing we want is for our clients not to know what's going on in trial. That it should be laid out, they should be part of the process, but also we shouldn't really be surprised. We should have done our own work and know who's going to be there, what the important characters are.
Right.
And so getting ready for trial, we'll do that, and we'll do a lot of questionnaires, we'll do some practice runs, making sure they're prepared.
Yeah.
Because you can get tripped up by some questions. Some attorneys will try and get you angry just so,
Litigation
as
is
you're
the
testifying.
difficult thing that you guys go through.
And you just fall apart.
Everybody thinks they can, I got this covered. And I'm telling you, it's not as easy. It's like hitting a 98-mile-an-hour fastball, right?
Yeah.
It can be very difficult.
But I think that's where the real hand-holding comes in for a client. We really have to shepherd them through that process because we can't think of it just as a legal process. For us, we have a legal job to do and it's very straightforward. Here's what I'm going to do. But for the client, this is often their only first and only divorce or custody and visitation.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that they need to understand what's going on and feel that they've got a say and a part in this. And that we're truly representing what they want.
I hear you, and I know you take great pride in being the best trial lawyer you could possibly be as far as helping our clients. And that means a lot because most litigators are not good trial lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
We take pride here, and I know you do too, as far as trying to figure out how we can optimize our trial experience. Yeah. And I know you teach other lawyers in the firm. I've seen you in our moot courtroom where you're teaching other lawyers how to cross-examine, how to examine the evidence, all that stuff. So it's very, very interesting. Well, Andy, I'm very excited about the whole process of you being here. And I tell you what, I think good things in the forecast as far as Fairfax is concerned. So
absolutely.
Nice to see you again.
I appreciate it.
Welcome aboard. Let's go to it.
All right. I'm excited.
Thank you.
Thank you.